In the previous lecture, we have discussed about the ontological point of view.
Well, I think we are formally starting now. Welcome back.
Proceeding further for the next technical session, so I have one query. In the previous session, we have discussed about the pharmacology of the drug. So I just need to know here what we are going in our research work is we are selecting a plant, we are screening for the pharmacological activity, and if we'll go back, means if we'll consider first the type of chemical constituents that are responsible for the activity, say, for example, epilepsy, we need to consider, we need to work upon any anti-epileptic drug. So should we consider first the type of the compounds responsible for the activity? Then should we then go for a mechanism of action by which the drug is acting, whether it would be effective for GABA receptors and all. We should go for the mechanism, and then we need to select the plants responsible for we should screen the plants which are having those active compounds responsible for the epilepsy. Hope so. My question is clear.
I think I understand it. I hope I understand it right. I think I'll just take this micro. Does anyone want to add anything to this question? So from my point of view, it's not about this morning's lecture, obviously, but it picks up what we did on the first day. And what it is all about is we find some activity. This activity in an extract is then we try to understand what's going on, and we identify a compound. Whoops. And this compound then is declared to be the active. One of the big frustrations I see in this whole field again and again, that we then identify something like camperol, sitosterol, God knows what else, routine, as an active. And that's why I brought up this paper from my computer. It's by a group in Brazil, and it points out the challenges associated with what they call interference. Now, what we find very often that extracts contain all sorts of compounds. We find the most prominent and the most abundant ones, and that tends to be flavonoids or maybe some other ones. And then suddenly in a paper published in the JEP or wherever have you, these compounds are declared to be the actives. Now, I'm in essence arguing that this is not the right approach. What also Luis Antonio Dutra and colleagues are arguing is that what you find very often are what I would call false positives. You find an activity, and it's then very problematic, for example, enzyme assays. Any enzyme-based assay will produce false positives with any compound which has a large number of OH groups. Simply some non-specific interference. Classical case, simple and more complex tannins. They just interfere with these molecules without being of any therapeutic benefits. So the two key criteria again and again are specificity and activity in a meaningful way. And that's, I think, with dealing with extracts, a very complicated issue to deal with. Now, this group of authors, what they really say here are, take a look at the second paragraph, and then I'll just read it to you. The most common features related to compounds that interfere in the assays are presence of reactive chemical groups, like what I said, OH group, tannin-type compounds, as for example aldehydes, which is another good example, compounds that alter antibody binding or those which modify the concentration of the analytes, lack of solubility and precipitation of substances in medium used in the assay, emission of fluorescence by compounds, promiscuous effect by activating of several targets simultaneously, among others. So these are very classical challenges which we all face. The experimental setup. Now, epilepsy is a very, very complex disease, and my response in the tea break was very simple. I cannot believe that in case of epilepsy, a compound like camphorol will have any beneficial effects. I just cannot see that this is plausible. This camphorol is found everywhere from apples to who knows what, so it's not, I cannot see how this is in any way a meaningful therapeutic intervention afterwards. Now, that may be A, that there's something in the assay which you need to reconsider, or B, there are other compounds in the extract which are maybe minor compounds which are not detected yet, which are not that easy to detect. So I think it's a case for really looking at this plant, and if I understand you right, it's a species of Asclepias. So Asclepias, my immediate reaction would be cardenolides, the famous Asclepias cardenolides, which are highly toxic. But they may be the ones behind this activity and not common flavonoid glycosides. So their application and interference are two aspects which are absolutely crucial to consider. Did I halfway answer your question? Okay, right, other question.
I was just checking. Actually, I was just seeing for whether camphorol is having the activity. It has been mentioned in literature that is
I think it's not
used for seizures.
I'm convinced these are false positives.
Treatment of seizures.
I'm absolutely convinced these are not relevant, pharmacologically relevant findings.
Mm-hmm.
That's my take on it, and I'm not alone there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the paper I just showed you is a classical example of colleagues. What are flavonoids? They are polyvalent. They are structures with many non-specific. Yeah.
They are compounds with many non-specific effects. Some time ago, we had a flurry of studies where colleagues were doing docking studies. And flavonoids seem to be docking into every little enzyme pocket you can think of. Now, I'm not an expert in docking studies, so I had to go to a few people who can explain me what the heck is going on. And they were very clear that these authors did not report data which are in any way meaningful scientifically or therapeutically, because the molecules are simply too small and they will fit there, but this doesn't mean anything because it's not a specific docking, it's just an interference. So, and I know the literature is full of data, and one of the things I'm always asking when I'm dealing with reviews, we critically must assess the evidence we find in the literature. And if authors claim that camphorol is the active ingredient of the plant in the treatment of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, epilepsy, neurodegeneration, I would automatically ask them to go back to the literature and check how robust is this evidence. Have they really done it to a level which is pharmacologically acceptable? So I would, in this case, really very strongly suggest to get somebody on board who is a great expert in neurological diseases. But the thing is, remember what I said on the first day, 60% of all pharmacological studies cannot be reproduced. What is the percentage with plant extracts? Question mark. If we ever were trying to do an experiment where we take studies and reproduce them. I'm sorry, I think it would at least be 60%, and I think it would be higher. And that's something, as a community, we need to think about how to tackle it. Not a very nice topic because it's very frustrating, but certainly very important.
We should use standardized extract, I suppose.
Well,
Method of
standardizing the
extraction.
extract is a tiny part of it, but what is standardization? I think what you actually mean is we should only work with chemically defined extracts. And remember, we also had this both yesterday and the day before. Now, standardization has a very important implication. You know what the active ingredient is, so what we are talking about here cannot be standardization, because we don't know yet what the active is. Once we know what the active is, and we know that's the compound responsible for the activity, you can do standardization, but we need a much better understanding of the chemical profile.
Yeah.
I'm convinced these camphorol type compounds are marker substances. They simply show that yes, this is the plant we are talking about. So, and it's a very big debate in our wider community. How far can we go with regards to bioactivity and chemical characterization? Some journals really only want a full HPLC fingerprint. Now, the answer you would give me is, I have a hard time getting access to an HPLC and do the fingerprint. So is this the right one? I'm personally taking the approach, whatever you're doing, try your best to provide some sort of chemical characterization. That's why what we looked at yesterday in the context of publishing a paper, in Frontiers we are saying you must characterize the extract one way or another. And that can be HPTLC. If you have access to HPTLC, fine by me. It can be LCMS, MS, God knows what. Fine. Of course, LCMS, blah, blah, blah would be better. But I only know 2 labs in Europe which can do this confidently. So that's a very small segment. HPTLC is so attractive because of this, because it's simple and nobody can say that you can't use it. But it has its limitations. At the same time, you need to have a method which is valid for this plant. If you have an unknown plant and you just run any type of chromatography and you have one big peak, it's not a characterization. So it actually raises all sorts of questions. The minimum standard for us in terms of characterizing an extract is really define the extract. At least provide the drug extract ratio. How much drug you use to obtain a certain amount of extract. Provide full information, if you can, on the processing, solvents, etc. That's an absolute minimum. But better some sort of a chromatographic documentation. What is then working is very problematic. But again, if 60% of all pharmacological studies cannot be reproduced, how can we in the area of plant extract improve this to a level where we at least reach 60% non-reproducibility? I think we are well above it right now. So it's a huge challenge, and that brings back your question. We all too often come up with compounds which simply are completely implausible as pharmacological agents. And that doesn't lead us anywhere if we identify camphorol as a potent anti-diabetic agent when it's not, or an anti-epileptic agent or whatever. It is simply a polyvalent in vitro active compound. Right.
People are relating the mechanism of, in the literature, the mechanism of action has been reported. That it is acting on GABAergic receptors, right? And the mechanism of action of anti-epileptic drug is on GABA receptors. So we should not match the mechanism it means.
Look, I'm not. That's why I'm saying. That's okay. That's why it's an interesting micro now. I think I'll just have to stay here and I'll talk. That's why.
Your voice is audible. You can.
How do we? All right. Okay. Oh, you want to write it up? Okay. But that's why I'm saying I know very little about epilepsy. If it interferes with the GABA receptor, fine by me. The number of times I've shown a paper in our field to an expert in a certain therapeutic area, and the expert tells me, Mike, this is complete rubbish. No pharmacologist in our area would accept this as an assay. It happens again and again. We recently had a case, not in epilepsy, but in another area. The great advantage we have in Frontiers, contrary to other journals, I can just contact the guy who's an expert in inflammation and medicinal pharmacology, in neuropharmacology, and ask her or him, what do you think about this? And in most cases, they simply say, get them to do a proper assay. I'm not saying, in this case, these are not proper assays because I simply don't know it. What I'm saying, send this paper to an epilepsy expert and ask him or her for an assessment. Yeah? That's what I'm saying. And going back to what we did yesterday about publication standards, the rationale behind both the rules of 5 and the 4 pillars of best practice is very much about coming to grips with what is needed with a robust, basic pharmacology. Why is a DPPH assay not a meaningful tool to assess activity? Why is the red for edema as a standalone assay no longer acceptable? We need to decide this as a community, and that's where I rely on the experts in pharmacology who are saying this works and this doesn't. Combination of methods are useful and important. I can't comment on epilepsy, but get the person on board who knows something about it. And I still suspect that I'll be right, that this person will say, yeah, it's all okay, but it doesn't prove it in a plausible way. Because I'm really struggling to see anything here. You know, you would have epidemiological evidence if temporal containing botanical materials are active. Then eat all sorts of fruits and vegetables. You can't have epilepsy in this country because you're eating all these vegetables. You know, I don't think it works if you take a bigger picture. And in vitro pharmacology, in vivo pharmacology, and clinical experience are worlds apart. Which doesn't mean that we don't need all three, but all three need to be clear about what they can and cannot achieve.
I have two queries on behalf of my scholars. While doing the SPTHC, sometimes when the constituents are known, we are using the standard markers also. But sometimes we do not have standard marker, or the plant is unknown. Then we have to do normal SPTHC. How far it is acceptable from the publishing point of view if we are doing the SPTHC fingerprinting without using any marker?
Again, I can only speak for those journals where I have a responsibility. JEP I'm not doing with original articles, so I need to leave it to the editors who are dealing with this. And that's a different one, but I would say JEP takes a more relaxed approach, and that would certainly be accepted as being okay. If the quality of the chromatogram is adequate. Yeah? In case of Frontiers, I would say this sounds, if you can justify it, and if it's clearly spelled out, and if the HPTLC chromatogram is a proper one. The problem I see are all these weird things, what I said earlier.
Yes, yes.
You have one HPLC peak,
Yeah.
and you say, okay, that's an HPLC chromatogram.
Yes.
You have one HPLC,
Yes.
and if you do a scan,
Yes.
and there's one little bubble in the middle.
Yes.
So I'm afraid these unknown drugs need some method development.
Yes.
And in fact, we are very often not using a very clever approach. Now, you have an unknown plant, an Asclepias species. Now, the first thing I would then try to do is, what methods exist for other species of this genus? And try to copy this one. And because they have cardenolites, I would say, okay, I need to figure out what is used for cardenolites. I have no clue, because I never worked with cardenolites. But that would be my approach to see, okay, can we find a meaningful HPLC fingerprint? Yeah? Of course, we had it easy. You know, we had the HPLC association methods for ginkgo, for hypericum, and for rhodiola. We didn't have it for maca, so that's one where we had to do quite a bit of method development.
Yes. My second query is, you have mentioned the blockchain.
Yeah.
The quality control, standardization. Can you explain it a little bit more, and other AI techniques which can be introduced in recent times for the quality control and standardization or adulteration can be introduced?
Yeah. What do you want there?
How this AI technique can be used in the
Well, we don't know yet, because I'm sorry, part of the challenge is that earlier this year we published a paper which basically says, is there a role for blockchain systems in ethnopharmacology? Question mark.
Okay.
So we have a question mark at the end. The answer may well be no. And I'm not going to stand here and say it's going to be the solution. Now, in the end, for me, blockchain is nothing else but bookkeeping. So for me, what is important is the content. And that's our task which we need to define. And that's where I'm saying that's what we should now look at in terms of developing. Now, take the example I did with rhodiola. What do the farmers have to do when they collect their material in the highlands of the Himalaya? What documentation is needed? That can be defined, and the Chinese are very good in saying you must deliver this, and they deliver it. What do you have to do if you collect it from the wild? It will be a different set of criteria. Then you bring this to the market. The market tender, what can you do and what is feasible? The market person who buys it from 10, 15, 20, 30 people sells it on to somebody who processes the material. What do they have to do? I think that's our task, and that's the same is true in India with whatever plant we are thinking about here. And the next question which comes in is, where is it going to work? Is it going to work with mass products like turmeric? Or take ginseng. Is it going to work with the common commercial ginseng used in Chinese foods? I'm convinced it is not. But if you pay $300,000 or pounds or euros for one root of ginseng, implementing a blockchain technology for these very special ginsengs would be very cost effective. And you would be able to actually demonstrate it. So we have economic questions which are outside of my remit.
Any others?
I have a question, sir.
Oh, the first one you ever asked. Yeah. Okay. Give it a go.
I would like to first I want to know that all of the data that you presented during the presentation, it was HPLC data, sir.
Yeah. HPLC and
H1NMR.
yeah, HPLC
But sir,
and NMR.
but sir, you didn't carry the HPLC data to principal component analysis.
Yeah, yeah.
You prefer the actual NMR data. So what was lacking in the HPTLC data that doesn't suffice the data to be carried to the 3 sequence component analysis for
Well,
chemical variability?
Yeah. I don't know where CAMAC is nowadays with integrating the data for HPTLC into a PCA level. That's for something you can ask. Are you the one from CAMAC? No. No, okay. Well, when the colleague from CAMAC arrives, he's the person or she to ask what is the status with CAMAC at this stage in order to develop. I know they had it under development. The problem is that PCA requires a very, very sharp resolution of peaks. And the most minor shift changes the PCA completely. With an NMR, you can achieve this sharpness very well. HPTLC is very bad at this. Because it's a more, it's a chromatographic method, not a spectroscopic method. The same is actually true for HPLC. HPLC chromatograms and PCA analysis are very problematic because you cannot get such a high resolution as you need. And that's the problem. And if you think about any of these HPTLC chromatograms, just a little shift because it's at the, I know it's all very well controlled, but any little shift will create variability which is not real. Okay, thanks for your question, interesting one. What else?
There is one more, sir. Can I go back to the first day presentation?
You can do what you want. Yes.
You talk about that while collecting the ethnobotanical evidences, we can have some focused questions and some unfocused.
No, I wouldn't say focus. No, we have open and closed questions. Yeah.
How to gather the knowledge, how to get the meaningful out of that? So, what type of method we have to follow for the second part, that open part?
Okay.
I hope it sounds logical, sir.
It sounds very logical, but I need a. Give me a moment.
I'm sorry, sir, if I get you in some.
You don't get me into trouble, you just need to wait. You get the rest of the group in trouble because they have to wait. Here we are. Now, I think I'll just sit here because that's easier to do.
Yes.
Because it's a Word document. This is the questions we were sort of the questionnaire we were developing, and so these are okay, thank you. Yeah, so for example, if you take a look at this question here, what I want you to see here are not the detailed questions as such, but what kind of questions we are asking. Now, this one here, the top one, is in fact what's called a scaled question. I prefer to use herbal medicines over conventional pharmaceutical medicines. So we are asking in this questionnaire from basically I strongly agree to I strongly disagree. This is a so-called Likert scale we have used there. And the Likert scale gives you a clear middle point. This is the important thing. I'm neutral about it. Otherwise, you don't get a clear answer. And then you can say, well, I do agree, I don't agree, whatever. So these are the same. Is a similar tool is in the next one where you have a 5-point scale. This is very similar. It's always uneven numbers, but these are very typical scaled questions. That's a closed question. Because in the end, I prefer to use herbal medicines over conventional pharmaceutical medicines. If you are neutral and don't care and don't have any knowledge about it, it's just not your topic, you can either not answer it or give a meaningless answer. Yeah? Now, contrary to this, we have, let's see, okay, contrary to this, we have open questions. So, for example, here is something where we ask you what type of products are you interested in, beauty products, etc. It's not quite the questionnaire I want. Apologies. So that's the only one we have here right now. So if you look at some of the data here, these are other types of questions. Now this is not a questionnaire as such, this is our analysis. But here you, for example, you ask again very specific questions retrospectively. When did you last use a herbal medicine? A week ago, a month ago, a year ago, never, whatever. So these are very typical closed questions. Then you have open questions. A simple open question would be, remembering the last time you used a herbal medicine, tell me about your experience with its effectiveness. So this is an open question. People may not say anything. People may say, actually, the experience was horrible. I got heart palpitations, it made me all very nervous, and it was very bad. Or you get something. So this is the art of constructing a questionnaire, is getting it right. Now, if you come from the tradition of sociology, the question I just proposed would not be one you want to have, because sociologists love data which are quantifiable. I'm very open to more ethnographic data, and I find them extremely useful. And that's why we have these type of open questions also. I do think the field has become much more open now compared to 10, 15 years ago, where this sort of mixing of methods was seen as wrong, and now we've invented the term a mixed method approach, and everyone is happy and it has a label, and so we can use it. But that's how I would see it as an appropriate strategy. So define themes, define what type of questions work best for it, test it, and then we can use these questionnaires. I hope that answered it a little bit.
It was very much.
It's a big topic. Yeah. What else? Any other questions? Also about this morning. I see nothing. When shall we go on to?
You conclude the session. If you have any queries or questions, you can.
One thing I want to ask. In the morning, we have seen the different simplicity to complexity for the quality control or for the safety of the organism. So I want to know that how important will be the morphological parameters in the quality control of the, as these are the simplest, and I think they are the cost effective also, because generally we can evaluate the drug by the morphological parameters. So how important this would be the these morphological parameters for the evaluation of the herbicides?
I think they are crucial. It depends, obviously, what potential drug we are speaking about. In many cases, I still insist it's the best method to assess what's going on. Unfortunately, in Western Europe, we are losing the skill. So the simple challenge is we don't have too many people who can do it outside of a very small group of countries. Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Austria, a little bit in Germany. There you have quite a tradition of doing it. So the biggest challenge I see, I think, in the UK, there may be 4 people who could still do microscopic authentication, me included. Most of the ones who were trained in it are long dead now. Britain has given up pharmacognostic training in a traditional sense 20, 30 years ago, and the wider training goes back even longer. So there are very few people who know anything about it. But you have very well-trained people, and if you can get them to do it, it is a useful element. The industry doesn't like it because it's too cost-effective. The nice thing about many of the chemical methods is that they can be semi or fully automated, so they reduce the staff cost. To get one microscopic validation may take 2 hours, which is not a lot of time, you'll say, but if you have 50 batches, it's a significant amount of time, including everything. So that's why I think it's far less popular in the industry than it was some decades ago. But this doesn't take away anything of its importance.
My question is, there's no extension to Dr. Vinay. Normally, when we are starting any project and taking any plant material, we are taking from a trader or a supplier or something like that we take. And most of our time is consumed to analyze whether it is free from microbes or not, it is free from heavy metals or not, free from aflatoxin and other adulterations also. So what is the situation in your lab? Whether you get the standard raw material so that we can directly go for the activity studies or biochemical studies and like that, or you also analyze the raw material as we are for these parameters.
I think it's very good that you're doing it, because I often have serious doubts about materials collected and the natural products in them and the activity. You know, I know of one study a few years ago where they looked at some effects in one of the gynecological models. And in the end, they found out that the compound behind it in fact was introduced with sewage, and was simply left over of the pill. So the plant material in one way or another was contaminated with a low dose, and you found quite an activity in this model, but it's completely artificial. That's not quite what we want. we don't want to identify some estrogen, synthetic estrogens in a plant, but that's the problem we have to tackle.
Are there any technologies developed to sterilize them free from microbial contents?
Well, microbial is problematic, no, because especially the aflatoxins, which are a very serious problem.
Very serious problem.
You can get rid of them, but they are not specific enough. So I'm afraid the best methodology is to prevent it. Make sure that you have your own standards of collecting and processing.
Yes, yes.
The material we get is obviously varied. If we collect it in a region where a student comes from, let's say Saudi Arabia and Thailand or China, we must rely on the supplier having the right procedures in place. And we are trying to check it. If we get commercial samples, we have some very good suppliers where all this has been checked. And that's why, for example, I have relatively high trust in suppliers of European phytotherapeutic agents because they just can't afford to really produce rubbish. But even there you find trace amounts. A big debate right now are the pyridine alkaloids. And that's something which in the Bible I say would not be a big problem.
Yes.
But it obviously is a concern if you are dealing with it in the context of what level of contamination do you find acceptable or not.
Yes.
So that's more from a patient/consumer perspective. But experimentally for pharmacology, I think, especially in the area of cytotoxicity, antimicrobial activity, estrogen-related activities at all levels, and inflammation, we have some very serious problems, especially with in vitro and enzyme-based assays. And we forget about it, we ignore it.
So that's what should be complete. Session.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a nice interactive session. Hope we all have a better understanding regarding ethnopharmacology, ethnobotany, and all the information sir has given to us. Now it's our pleasure that we have among us Mr. Vishwajit Kale, application chemist from Mumbai. We heartily welcome you, sir. I would request now our coordinator, Jan, Professor Munish Garg, to kindly welcome Mr. Vishwajit by presenting him a plant sapling.
So I want to announce that Mr. Vishwajit has come from all the way from Mumbai, from the Chemec. And since we are using the HPDNC from last more than 10 years, I would say that this is a very wonderful tool that has been just detailed by the Professor Michael also. We need to go sometimes for the very complex analytical tools, even HPDNC will do. And Mr. Vishwajit will explain it in detail, how we can effectively use that is acceptable at the international level. So we welcome here and please join us. After that we will break for the lunch, and by 2 o'clock sharp we will assemble again for this interactive session. He will tell about the various techniques and virtual training he will give because it's not possible to go for the instrument and have a hands-on training. But virtually I have requested him to give you an insight how the instrument looks like and how it works. So he will give you that type of training. It will go up to 2.5 hours, I think. So please join us at 2 o'clock or after that. Okay? Thank you very much. Welcome. So let us discuss for lunch. We will assemble at 2 o'clock.